Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazzo.
Hi, friends. Thank you so much for following us on Rumble. Our viewership is increasing there. Make sure you follow Freedom Project Media. Also, you can download the Freedom Project Media app. And because I was a bad boy and got a strike on YouTube a couple weeks ago, I was removed due to community standards. But I'm back on now. But I put all my stuff on Rumble. It's not just a backup anymore. That's what I want to direct people to, because they're not censoring us. So anyway, what we're talking about today, a lot of articles, a lot of news items, and politics, and the Democrat convention next week in Chicago. And that's a head scratcher still to me. But the theme today is gaslighting. What the left, the globalists, the elites, the media is doing to we the people is absolutely astounding. And part of that we can see with Kamala Harris and how they treat news about her. So Pete Garcia, and the website, friends, is rev310.net. That's REV 310.net. Good to have you back with us, brother. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to be back, David. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thanks for your time. Let's start with attacks on the U.S. that could be coming. I want to mention this story. At least 5 U.S. personnel injured in an attack against a military base in Iraq on Monday, the U.S. officials told Reuters. And this is interesting. We're probably going to see more of this. You said something before we got on the podcast that they sense or they smell blood in the water, meaning America's weak militarily, and we've got so many vulnerabilities right now. And a lot of people are speculating there may be an attack before November, because if Trump gets reelected, then he's pretty strong on national security. Your thoughts on what's going on when it comes to possible attacks and what's happening?
Yeah, I think right now, between now and election day, I mean, I didn't even go back in time to July or June. But I think we're probably at the most vulnerable time right now as a nation that we've ever seen. And I feel like there is that our enemies, the enemies of the United States, do smell blood in the water. And they think that now is probably one of the best times or most opportune times for them to strike if they were going to do it. They may not want to risk a Trump presidency.
Well, it's interesting. You're a military veteran, so a lot of vets are probably furious at what some people believe, and I tend to lean this way too, that it is a purposeful weakening of the American military. I mean, recruitment is just at record level lows, and we're in a world of hurt right now, and we are vulnerable. So as a former military veteran, your thoughts, Pete?
Well, whether you look at the conspiracy side of the house with the Committee of 300, or you look at the Agenda 2030, World Economic Forum's Great Reset, all of the varying plots to bring about a one world government, part of that is bringing demoralizing a nation, in effect, to destroy patriotism. Because they want to destroy nationalism. They have to break those down. They have to break the will of the people down. So you get these incredibly inept leaders that put the military through the ringer, and they don't have to necessarily come out and do anything nefarious, but they can demoralize the military in a variety of ways. One is these never-ending wars where you're going on constant deployments, and after a while you just get burnt out because your marriages get destroyed. Your families get alienated. People get injured all the time in these conflicts. So that's one aspect of it. And that happened even under a Republican administration with the war on terror. Moreover, when they began to implement all these social projects inside of the U.S. military, like the Obama administration did, that's equally as devastating to the morale. And so I think we've been under this system now for 24 years, since 9/11. And it feels like there's no. I mean, I would be surprised if the recruiting numbers were up. I would totally expect them to be where they are or even lower at this point.
Mm-hmm. And it has to be purposeful when you think of the transgender ideology. For one example, even the military, what was it, the Navy? Someone had a drag queen represent them in a promotional video. I think it was for the Navy. Don't quote me on that. But some of this seems to be intentional. Pete, am I missing something?
No, it's absolutely intentional. And so I think that with regard to a lot of the chaos and the craziness in the world today, we in the West are, observers, spectators are looking at these things, wondering what is going on. But behind the scenes, and whether you're talking about the Arab riots in the UK, the political chicanery going on in the French and the UK elections, the problems they're having in the Netherlands, and really across all of Europe, that are taking in these open border immigrant policies that they're implementing through the EU. As far as I mean, any part of the world we can look at, Venezuela, all of this stuff is intentional and is creating a state of chaos and instability and uncertainty in our day and age. And I think from a macro view, this is Satan's. Satan has his fingerprints all over this because ultimately he wants to get the world population so desperate and so ready for peace and security that they will embrace any man that comes along and promises to deliver that. And I think that we see that in Scripture with the
Yes.
rise of the Antichrist.
Yeah, peace and safety, peace and security. I think we saw a little glimpse of that during COVID. We saw how much people were willing to comply and just give away their freedom, which was really shocking to me when you think about America and where we came from as a nation, how we were founded. But let's go over to talk about gaslighting a little bit more, Pete. Let's talk about Kamala Harris and how the media is doing an amazing job of just covering for her, gaslighting the Americans when it comes to her record, her career, her accomplishments, her worldview. But let's just take one example, the southern border. You can go look up videos if you are informed and you know where to get them, where she or Biden announced her as the border czar, and that was even the leftist media, even the communist networks were saying, yeah, Kamala Harris is the border czar. This was years ago, several years ago, and now you can't find it, or they're denying it, or they're framing it differently. She was never. So Pete, what are they doing here? What are they trying to do? They want to keep the southern border open. But yet no one's accountable for some of the chaos it has caused. Certainly not Kamala Harris. Your thoughts?
Gaslighting is a definition. It's a form of psychological abuse where a group or an individual is made to question their sanity because what they're seeing is not what they're being told. They're seeing one thing and being told another. And I think with the case of Kamala, we spent the first 3.5 years of her basically being ignored by the media and basically relegated to she was just somebody in the background. We know that Biden hired her not because she was competent, because she has no accomplishments in her history anywhere that would enable her to be a capable leader, but rather she was hired because she was a person of color and she was a woman. She kind of checked all those DEI blocks, and so now she's next in line to take the commander in chief position, and now the media is being forced to sing her praises. And I mean, they're doing it willingly, but they're having to come up with all manner of things to cover for her ineptitude and all of her failures, including an open border that's allowed anywhere from 10 to 40 million illegal aliens to come across. And these aren't just Mexicans. I mean, my dad came from Mexico in the 1960s illegally the first time, and then he came back over the second time legally and became a citizen. And I think for him, that helped him appreciate what the cost of citizenship means. And he became a very productive citizen for the next, for the rest of his life, really. But what we're seeing now is that they're using Mexico, and I say they, talking about the Chinese, the Middle East, folks from the Middle East, folks from all over the world are using Mexico as the entry point to come into the United States. And now we're starting to see it come down from Canada. And I think J.J. Carroll, the retired border guard that's really brought a lot of this stuff to light, saying anywhere from about 100,000 military-aged males from China, that had served in the PLA, are here in the United States. And taking all that into account, we're not going to say that every person that comes across the border illegally is a terrorist.
Right.
I mean, they're here illegally, so they're breaking the law. So that's problem number one. But even if there's, out of that 10 million, let's go to the low end, if it's 10 million, even 10% of those folks are terrorists, and that is still a frightening number, because what that signals to me is that they may be setting up a network of sleeper cells all across the United States, and they're going to wait for the right moment to be triggered to create the appropriate amount of chaos that can be used in any number of ways.
So if they're breaking the law, that must mean there's a law on the books when it comes to legal immigration policy, but the left isn't carrying that out. Isn't that almost treasonous that an administration would say, no, we're not going to follow the law? I mean, I wasn't planning on asking you this, but this is a serious question, because the media certainly isn't treating it that way. They are pro open borders, and they're gaslighting the people again. So, Pete, your thoughts on that? There is a law, isn't there? Policy on immigration?
No, this is absolutely treason. It's absolutely treason, and I think that part of the reason why they are really trying, they're going to move heaven and earth to try and prevent Trump from becoming the next president, is because he threatens to expose all that and hold folks accountable. And I would just say that a second Trump administration would be vastly different than a first Trump administration. I think in 2016, he was as surprised as anybody that he actually won. He figured it was so rigged and so corrupted that he didn't have a chance. But they underestimated the will of the people. I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 81% of Christians voted in that election. In 2020, in comparison, about 69% of Christians voted. And so he would have still won the 2020 had they not done the midnight ballot dumps and the Dominion voting machine, glitches and stuff. But there was just enough margin for them to slip in, thousands of ballots and make it look like it was legitimate. But in reality, if Christians get out and vote overwhelmingly, they would have to cheat so hard. Yep. I mean, it would be so obvious. And but I think that this Trump administration, he's had 9 years to vet those people, his friends and allies, to see who stuck with him through all these things. So I think his inner circle this time is going to be far more capable and loyal to him. And not only that, but the RNC wasn't his party back in 2016. He was the outsider. This time around, he is the RNC, and they are his party. So if he wins, the down ballots will also carry over, and it looks like he'd take both houses. And he might be in the right place at this time to be able to actually start to drain the swamp.
Well, before we take a brief pause with Pete Garcia, you mentioned your thoughts about Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, even more radical and more leftist than Kamala Harris, if that were possible, and apparently it is. So you say there's a reason that you think they picked him to be the VP candidate. Your thoughts on that?
I think Harris had him in mind because she wanted him as her insurance policy, somebody that was far more radical and hated than she is. That way, if she gets into the position of commander in chief, that would hopefully, in her eyes, ensure her survivability. She doesn't have any kind of unfortunate accidents. So she picked somebody worse than her, just like Biden picked somebody worse than him. It seemed to work out for Biden this time. And she's hoping that it's going to work out well for her. But yeah, he is her insurance policy.
Very interesting take from Pete Garcia. We'll be right back on Worldview Matters.
Today's show is brought to you by Harbinger's Daily, world news biblically understood. Stay informed at harbingersdaily.com.
If you know someone who might be interested in sponsoring Worldview Matters, please send us an email, worldviewmatters@fpeusa.org. The website, worldviewmatters.tv. Pete, before we get to the NASDAQ and the stock market and Lockheed Martin, very interesting what happened recently there. But I want to ask you about this story. And then whatever you want to share about, because we've talked to a lot of people about the attempted assassination on President Trump and what happened there, and the sloped roof, and there were people inside the building, and so many things that went wrong. Former Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle she actually pushed to destroy evidence when cocaine was found in the White House. Several sources have come out with this. This is interesting. It might show favoritism. Should we read into this at all, Pete? Because she was, of course, over the Secret Service when the attempt on Trump's life. Go ahead.
Director Cheadle, or former Director Cheadle, was Jill Biden's Secret Service security. She was a part of that detail. And when Jill Biden, when they came in 2020, she brought her with her and brought her up to that position. So there is a good deal of loyalty between Cheadle and the Bidens. So it doesn't surprise me that she would cover for them. And I'm sure she's probably covered far worse things than just that. But there was really 12 things for me that were a standout issues for the July 13th rally. One is that there wasn't any kind of coordination between the Secret Service detail and the local law enforcement, according to their own testimony in Congress.
Yeah.
Two Secret Service agents refused the drone support that local law enforcement had that day. There was the Secret Service counter sniper teams. They were added to that detail for the very first time in Trump's campaign thus far. So in all the other previous engagements he's been in, he's not had any Secret Service counter sniper teams support there with him. July 13th was the first time.
Wow.
4 is that CNN decided to cover this event for the first time since like 2016. I mean, they really don't cover his rallies live.
Interesting.
Because he trashes them so hard. So this was the first time.
Huh.
And then on top of that, you have the fact that they knew about this guy, Thomas Crooks, a good 20, 30 minutes prior to, and Trump still got to take the stage, even though they were still trying to figure out where this guy was.
Yep.
5, 6, they left the building out, AGR building, they left it out of their security perimeter. So those were all kind of failures at the leadership level. Another one that's really telling to me was that they had Truth Social and Gab were shorted shortly prior to the 13th of July.
What does that mean?
So they shorted their stocks.
Oh.
They short sell. Yeah, they were looking to make money on the Truth Social and Gab, which Trump had significant financial money into. They were looking to make money off of that by shorting it, expecting some bad news to come out of it. And surely, had Trump not turned his head a few inches, it would have been bad, and they would have made how much? I don't know, millions off of that sale. So somebody had knowledge prior to this going into it. We don't know exactly who that is. Another big one for me is, how did a 20-year-old not have social media? How does anybody in this under 20 and younger not have social media these days? It looked like his all of his stuff has been scrubbed. His house had been scrubbed, and so the FBI, the same folks that were in charge of the Vegas shooting, the fires in Maui, you think of every other kind of unsolved or unanswered issue we've had over the last 20 years, or really going back to JFK assassination in '63. We don't get the truth from them. It just gets buried. And when they label the classification, they may put like an assassination attempt and terrorism. The minute they put terrorism on top of that, they can classify that document. They don't have to brief it in public or brief the public in general. And the last thing for me on this, and I'll let you, and I'll get done, is that this was the last live rally prior to the RNC. So I think the intent was for Trump to actually be killed in this rally. That would have put the RNC into a tailspin, and the only other candidate that was even in the race with him in the Republican primaries was Nikki Haley, and I think she did have a number of delegates set aside for her. So by default, she would have been the Republican nominee going into this election in November.
Speaking of sending them scrambling, now it's on the other side, because the Democrats seem to have had to scramble and get Kamala and Tim Walz, and now their convention is next week in Chicago. Pete, would you like to speculate? Is Kamala going to be the candidate? And you can go on record, but obviously this is so much could happen because I don't know, anything goes. It seems right now.
Yeah, so obviously Kamala was not their first choice. I think if they'd have known and had some ability to go back in time, they probably would have had Biden drop out a long time ago, so they could have had time to bring in a new candidate as a VP, and then eventually put that VP in the position to be running for president in 2024. But now they're stuck with Harris, and it seems like she's playing. She's a Democrats and folks of her ilk are survivors. They know how to play the game, and so she picked somebody far more radical and worse than her. I mean, this guy was basically responsible for the burning of Minneapolis during the George Floyd riots.
Yes.
So, and not only that, but he's done and said a lot of other terrible things. But but yeah, he's her insurance policy for now. So it looks like she's going into it.
Yeah.
We'll see how Chicago 2024 turns out for
Yeah.
them. Hopefully, it's not anything like Chicago 1968.
And what happened then for those that don't remember that?
Oh, well, I mean, that was riots and protests. I mean, basically, Chicago was on fire. LBJ decided not to run that year. He wasn't going to run for a second term. So, he took over for Kennedy after Kennedy was assassinated.
Yeah.
So then he ran for I guess his first term there in '64, and then in '68 decided not to run again. I don't know if it was health issues or whatever, but that triggered a free fall for the DNC that year.
I think he just thought that he already did everything he wanted to do. He got the Great Society. He eradicated poverty and helped the inner cities and did all that, right? I'm saying that in a joking way. So, Pete, it's interesting that so she might be the candidate. This leads a lot of people to believe that she is so unlikable, unelectable. Her record is awful. Her policies are hurtful to the nation, and they can't cover that up forever. It seems to lead people to think that the only way that she could win is if they rig it or cheat or if there's enough fraud again. Are you concerned about that?
Yeah, of course. But I think this time that the Trump campaign, all of the folks involved in that are not going into this as naively as they did in 2020. I think the Trump campaign now has the support of the RNC legal arm, which is pretty vast from what I understand.
Okay.
In 2020, he did not have that support, so he was forced to use the lawyers that he had, and those became TV spectacles that all eventually began to fall apart. But when the RNC gets behind a candidate and is able to provide that kind of legal support, I think what we're going to see and what we're seeing now is they're beginning to front load all of these lawsuits ready to go in case there are issues in states that are refusing to strengthen their election laws, like keeping the mail ballots out, the where you could put the mail ballots into. And I think Georgia is still using the Dominion voting machine. So I think this time there may be a challenge, there may be an attempt by the left to do this, but I think the Trump team is far better equipped this time around than last time.
Interesting. Okay, now over to NASDAQ. The stock market sell-off and what happened where it fell 1,000 points in a day. And you pointed out Lockheed Martin, and I read about this too. And it's a head-scratcher. What can you tell us? What do you think about what happened, Pete?
Right. Lockheed Martin, Boeing, there's a handful of companies that we would call the military industrial complex or that are part of that that group. I think that they sense that a war could break out any time because in my article, The Last Election, I put an election tree logic in there, and I asked three pivotal questions, and these are three inference points, and I think war could break out in any one of these. One, do we have an election? Yes or no? If we have an election, does Trump win or lose? And then if he wins, do the Democrats actually concede power? So in each of those scenarios, there's a military solution. But on top of that, you got all the craziness going on with Israel and Iran. Iran's threatening to launch an attack somewhere in the neighborhood of Tish B'Av, which is August 12th and 13th. And so between that and all of the other craziness happening there right in the Middle East, I think Lockheed Martin is hedging their bets and making quite a bit of money this fiscal quarter.
Interesting, really interesting. I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot to conclude that we're on the verge of another war or something else could be brewing, but it's interesting to see the stock market respond that way. So, Pete, to encourage, by the way, I want to encourage you guys. You can check out Pete on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Instagram. His website, rev310.net. Great articles and a lot of great insights. And love the one a while back in June, I think you wrote, gradually then suddenly, because that's what it seems like what's been happening. So I want to give you an opportunity in the last minute or so just to encourage believers to stay in the Word and stay the course, not panic, not be overwhelmed, but stay engaged, it's a tall order. Go ahead. What would you encourage them? How would you encourage them to do that?
Well, first to the voting part, I think that when Jesus told the Pharisees, when they brought him the coin and said, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Jesus said, show me the coin, and whose face is this? And they said, Caesar. And he said, well, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God the things that are God. Well, we happen to live in a republic, and part of our duty as a citizen is to vote.
Yes.
And while folks will say, well, voting is not the law, I will say that without voting, we'll have lawlessness. And so
yes.
Part of that, our duty is to render unto the system now is our political voice. And without a political voice and without a means to express ourselves, the only recourse we're left with is violence, which is the last recourse anybody should ever want to go to. But I would say to the believers out there, what I tell my audience all the time is that we have hands and feet, and we should be ready to serve and should be serving in our communities. We have our head on a swivel. That's an old military saying, but we're constantly on guard and looking out and making sure that we know what's going on around us. And lastly, we keep our eyes fixed on our blessed hope, who is Christ Amen. Returning, because he has promised us, and God is not a man that he can lie, and he is coming back for us, and we seem to be in that season.
Amen. Pete Garcia, thank you, brother, for your time, and Lord willing, we'll do this again soon. God bless you.
All right. Awesome.
All right, guys, and thanks again for sharing. Please do follow us on Rumble and other places. Share the podcast. God bless you, and as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter.